All right, so once we have made all the connections, right, there is no signal on the board, it's not powered yet, right. We'll start with the setup on the scope, and that's some of the steps are extremely important to get accurate measurements, right, so don't skip them. All right, let's start with default setup first, right. So just to make sure we clean out all the settings that were in the past and it doesn't affect all the settings we are planning on doing now. Okay, the first thing we should do is let the setup sit for 20 minutes, right. So it warms up and all the values kind of settle down, and that's when we should self calibrate. Okay, so let's wait for 20 minutes, come back and do this again. All right, so we waited for 20 minutes, the setup is nice and warm, it's ready to go, right. First thing we'll do is we'll self calibrate the ISOV probe, right. So this probes have a self calibration button on the controller itself, and it's right here. So we will hit the self cal button on both of them. This is TIVM, and then we'll do the same thing for TIVH, and as you can see, the orange light starts blinking when it is self calibrating. Once it is done self calibrating, you will see a solid green light on it, right. So that is good. You can see the solid green light coming up on the first one and the second one, so they are all self calibrated. If it does not, it will show you red, right. So there should be some problem. But coming back to this, self calibration is done. The next step is auto zero, right. So every time you have a new setup, or you change tips, you change channels, or within your measurements, if you see an offset that's coming up, right. So if you see a 0 and you see an offset from your measurement or drift, you should probably run an auto zero, right. So that will really help you make the measurements nice and zero, right. So how do you run auto zero? First of all, let's turn on all the channels, right. So you double tap on all the channels, turn them on. You can do it from here as well, right. And on ISO views, we'll click on channel 2, right, go under probe setup, and right there is auto zero, right. So we'll click that, it'll do its thing, and we are good to go. All right, so that's auto zero, and we'll do the same thing for the other one. This is the TIVH version. We'll hit auto zero. Make sure you don't have a signal on the circuit when auto zero is run, otherwise it will just confuse the probes. Okay, all right, so we have auto zero all set up, right. Next is probably the most important setting you should do for this measurements, especially because we are working with timing. You want to make sure that the delays between these probes are synced, so you can get a proper. So DISQ is one of the most important, in my mind, the setting you should be doing for this measurement, right. So how do you DISQ the probe? Okay, so we'll have to DISQ all the 4 channels or all the 4 probes on this channels to the specific, and we'll start with the first one, right. So you click on the first channel, you open the probe setup, right, and under probe setup you'll see the compensate, go to the next one. This is the DISQ setting, right. So for the first one, which is a passive probe, I'll set it to 0. Okay, so that's easy enough. Now you can DISQ all the channels from the same menu, or you can go to each channel, it'll give you the same results, right. So if I click on multi-channel right here, okay, so now you can see you're trying to DISQ the second channel with respect to first one. Okay, so in this case we have a TIVM on the second channel, so there's TIVM. The good part about using this TechVPI is the probes actually talk to your scope, and they have those information built in, right. So it's much easier. You just have to pick the number and run with it. Now if you're using an older scope or an older probe, this method changes because you'll have to know the delay that you need to put in that number, right. So for now it already knows the prop delay on the TIVM versus the propagation delay on the TIVM or the passive probe, right. So we just hit DISQ and it will fit the signals to make sure that propagation delay is measured, right. So next up is channel 3. Again, remember, you're always DISQing all the channels to the first channel or the source channel for that matter. Okay, so make sure you do not DISQ them with each other, DISQ them to the first channel, the source channel. Okay, so that's channel 3. Hit DISQ again, and we'll do that for the 4th channel as well. So that's 4, and there you have it, right. So all the channels are DISQed, so we'll make sure all the timing signals line up just right. All right, so next up is the compensation, right. So you want to compensate this probes to that specific channel so it knows what settings are, right. And that's usually very easy. You just go to the same probe setup, right, and you can go to the probe setup right here. So I've already done compensation on both the passive probes, and you can see that pass signal right there, and that's all you need, right. So you go through this method, right, and you can actually click on the compensate probe and it will show you the steps to do it. Pretty simple. ISOV probes do not need compensation because they're compensated at the factory, so we are good to go, right. So this is all the setup we need, and we are now ready to make the measurements. right? Let's go to the measurements.